Sometime around 740 BC, in the city of Jerusalem, a man sat down and began to write. He was not a king, though he had the ear of kings. He was not a soldier, though he lived through invasions that reduced entire nations to rubble. He was a poet who saw things no one else could see, a prophet who described events in such precise detail that centuries later, people who read his words would accuse him of cheating and insist that someone must have written his prophecies after the fact, because nothing could be that accurate in advance. His name was Isaiah. His scroll is 66 chapters long. It was written across roughly 40 years, the longest active ministry of any prophet in the Old Testament, and it became something so unusual, so unlike any other ancient text, that the early Christians gave it a nickname they usually reserved for the four authors of the New Testament. They called it the Fifth Gospel. But here's the thing about that nickname. It was not given because Isaiah wrote beautiful poetry, though he did. It was not given because he was an important historical figure, though he was. It was given because more than any other book in the Old Testament, Isaiah's words became the lens through which the earliest followers of Jesus understood who he was, what he did, and why any of it mattered. The New Testament quotes from Isaiah more than from any other Old Testament book, more than Psalms, more than Genesis, more than Exodus. Isaiah is quoted, referenced, or alluded to over 400 times in the New Testament. Every single gospel uses it. Paul quotes it more than any other book, and the final vision of the entire Bible, the new heaven and the new earth in Revelation, draws directly from the last chapters of Isaiah. And yet most people who try to read Isaiah come away confused. They describe it as two completely different books stitched together. The first half feels relentless, chapter after chapter of judgment against Judah, against Israel, against Babylon, against Moab, against Egypt, against every nation you can think of. Warnings, laments, accusations, woes. God seems furious. Then something shifts. Around chapter 40, the tone changes so dramatically that generations of scholars have argued it must have been written by a completely different person. The second half is tender. It is full of promises. Comfort, comfort my people. I have called you by name. You are mine. Waters will not overwhelm you. Nations will come to your light. I am doing a new thing. Fury, then tenderness. Fire, then a lullaby. But here's what I want to show you. Those two halves are not contradictions. They are two sides of the same argument. And the argument is this: God's holiness, the very thing we assume pushes him further from us, is actually the reason he refuses to let us go. That is the one idea running through all 66 chapters, from the very first verse to the very last. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let me take you to the beginning. The year is 740 BC. The king of Judah, a man named Uzziah, has just died. To understand why that matters, you need to know who Uzziah was. He had reigned for 52 years. An entire generation of people in Jerusalem had never known another king. He expanded the kingdom's borders. He strengthened the military. Under his rule, Judah was prosperous and stable. He was, by every measure the ancient world used to evaluate a king, a success. But at the end of his life, he made one catastrophic mistake. He walked into the temple and tried to burn incense on the altar. That job belonged to the priests. God's instructions had been specific, repeated, and had never changed. The altar was not open to kings, no matter how powerful. And the moment Uzziah reached toward it, the Bible says leprosy broke out on his forehead. Right there in the sanctuary, in front of the chief priests who were standing around him. He spent the rest of his life quarantined, cut off, declared unclean. The man who tried to grab what was holy without being invited paid a price he carried to his grave. That is the world Isaiah walks into. The earthly throne just went empty, and then Isaiah goes into the temple himself. And he sees something. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple, the one who never vacates the real throne, the one the smoke and the shaking cannot move. Above the Lord are creatures Isaiah calls seraphim. The word in Hebrew means burning ones, and they are not passive. They are in constant motion, covering their faces and their feet, and they are doing one thing. They are calling out to each other in a voice that shakes the doorposts of the temple and fills the entire house with smoke. Isaiah 6 verse 3. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. 3 times, not twice. In Hebrew, repeating something once means it is important. Repeating it twice is the highest form of emphasis in the language, a superlative. But repeating it 3 times is something Hebrew does for nothing else in the entire Old Testament except this one moment. 3 times holy. There is no category for it. And it is the first and only thing out of the seraphim's mouths. Not powerful, powerful, powerful. Not good, good. Holy, holy, holy. Whatever holiness is, it is the first, deepest, and most defining thing to be said about God. And Isaiah's immediate response is not awe, it is ruin. Isaiah 6 verse 5. And I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. He does not reach for a notepad. He does not ask for a closer look. He collapses. Because holiness, when it actually shows up in the room with you, does not feel like a beautiful sunset. It feels like exposure. It feels like standing in light so clean and so complete that every shadow inside you is suddenly, fully visible. And there is nowhere to go. But then something happens that Isaiah could not have anticipated. One of the seraphim, these burning creatures who exist to attend the throne of God, flies to the altar and takes a live coal from it. Not a gift, a burning ember from the altar of sacrifice, and he presses it to Isaiah's lips. The very thing Isaiah just declared was unclean. And he says, verse 7, Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. Sit with that for a moment. Uzziah, the king, reached toward the altar uninvited and left with leprosy that never healed. Isaiah, a commoner, was touched by the altar and was declared clean. The difference is not the altar. The difference is who was doing the reaching. Uzziah reached toward the holy. The holy reached toward Isaiah. God did not step back from Isaiah's uncleanness. He stepped toward it. The burning thing did not consume the person in front of it. It cleansed him. Holiness, instead of destroying the man who cannot survive it, did the work to make that man able to come near. That scene in chapter 6 is not a side story in the book of Isaiah. It is the whole book, compressed into a single moment. God sees the filth. God does not look away. God reaches in. Now, before we walk through the rest, there is a structural detail in Isaiah that most people step right past. And once you see it, it reorders everything. Isaiah has 66 chapters. The Protestant Bible has 66 books. Those two numbers are the same. And the division inside Isaiah maps onto the structure of the whole Bible with a precision that stops you cold the first time you notice it. The first 39 chapters of Isaiah deal primarily with judgment, law, the nations of the ancient world, warning, the consequences of turning away from God. There are 39 books in the Old Testament. Then something shifts at chapter 40. The last 27 chapters deal primarily with comfort, redemption, the coming servant who will bear the sin of the people, and ultimately a new creation. There are 27 books in the New Testament, and chapter 40, the first chapter of that second section, opens with words that the New Testament writers quoted immediately when they heard them. Isaiah 40, verse 3. A voice cries out, In the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. All 4 Gospels quote this exact verse to introduce John the Baptist, the man who stood in the desert and told people someone greater was coming. The man whose entire purpose was to prepare the way. He was described by Isaiah 700 years in advance. The hinge of Isaiah is the hinge of the whole Bible. The architecture of the book is not accidental. It is a preview written into the structure itself. But now let us walk through those first 39 chapters. Because people rush past them or skip them entirely because they feel too heavy. And that is a mistake. Because those chapters are not random. They are building a case. The opening of Isaiah is an indictment. God calls the heavens and the earth as witnesses. Isaiah 1 verse 2. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. Children have I reared and brought up, but they have rebelled against me. The metaphor is a parent standing in a courtroom, describing what they did for a child who turned their back on everything they were given. God is not cold and distant in these chapters. He is grieved. He is the wronged party in a broken relationship, and he is naming it out loud. Then, scattered through the darkness of chapters 1 through 39, there are lights. Sudden, blazing, specific lights. Promises so precise that they feel as though they belong in a different era. Isaiah 7, verse 14. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Emmanuel, God with us. Matthew quotes this verse in chapter 1 of his Gospel, pointing to the birth of Jesus. And notice the detail. It is not simply that a child will be born. It is that a virgin will conceive. And the name will not just be a name. It will be a description. God with us. Not God observing us from a safe distance. Not God tolerating us from the far end of a very long hallway. God in a body with us. And then, chapter 9. One of the most quoted passages in all of Christmas, read from pulpits and carved into stone and set to music for centuries, and still it does not wear out. Isaiah 9, verses 6 and 7. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and a government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. 4 names, 4 angles on the same person. The counselor who is wonderful, meaning not just skilled but outside of category, full of wonder. The God who is mighty, the Father who is everlasting, a strange thing to call a son, and the Prince of the one thing every empire and every human heart across every generation has spent its entire existence trying to manufacture and never been able to keep. Peace. And this is written in the middle of a section describing the Assyrian Empire grinding everything in its path to dust. That is the contrast Isaiah is drawing. Empires rise. They always rise. They fill every headline and terrify every border. And the person who holds the government on his shoulder is not the emperor. It is a child born in a city barely worth marking on a map. Then come the woes. Isaiah pronounces judgment on nation after nation. Babylon, Moab, Damascus, Ethiopia, Egypt, Edom, Arabia. Chapter after chapter. These are not random condemnations thrown at foreign governments. Isaiah happened to dislike. Each nation he names represents something the people of Judah were tempted to run to for protection instead of running to God. Military alliances, commercial wealth, geographic security, political arrangements. And one by one, Isaiah shows that every one of these will fail. Not because God is arbitrary or punitive, because no created thing can carry the weight of ultimate trust. Only the one who made it can hold it. Then in chapters 36 through 39, history breaks into the text. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, has surrounded Jerusalem. He sends a messenger to stand outside the walls and shout at the people on the ramparts. He lists every nation his army has already destroyed. He mocks the God of Israel by name. He tells the people of Jerusalem that no God of any nation has ever stopped Assyria, and theirs will not either. And King Hezekiah takes that letter, that official threatening document from the most powerful military force on earth, and he carries it into the temple. And he spreads it out before God. He literally lays the enemy's letter on the altar. Look at what they are saying. See this for yourself. And God responds through Isaiah. Tell Hezekiah, I heard you. And then in a single night, 185,000 Assyrian soldiers die in their camp outside the walls of Jerusalem. The army that destroyed nations is gone. Sennacherib goes home, and 2 of his own sons kill him there. God was not impressed by Assyria. He was not threatened by Sennacherib. The most powerful military force on earth at that moment was, from the perspective of the throne that shook the doorposts, a minor disruption on the way to a much larger story. The first 39 chapters are not just warnings. They are a demonstration. Everything you are tempted to trust will fail, and the one thing that will not, the Holy One whose glory fills the temple, the voice the seraphim cannot stop declaring. That is the only foundation that does not eventually crack. Now we come to chapter 40, and the shift is so sudden it is almost disorienting. Isaiah has just spent 39 chapters describing collapse. And then this, Isaiah 40 verses 1 and 2, "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem, and cry to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins." The same God who called the heavens and earth as witnesses against his people in chapter 1 is now saying, "Speak tenderly." The same God whose holiness shook the doorposts in chapter 6 is now saying your warfare is ended. The same God who watched every nation they trusted get dismantled is now saying, "I have pardoned you." What happened? Isaiah does not answer that yet. He first makes sure you know exactly who is doing the comforting. Isaiah 40 verses 12 through 14. "Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens with a span, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord, or what man shows him his counsel?" Verse 22. "He sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers." Verse 28. "The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable." And then, after the full weight of who this is has been placed in front of you, verse 31, "But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Notice the structure of that passage. God is infinite. You are a grasshopper. And the one who holds the oceans in the hollow of his hand is the one who gives the grasshopper wings. The greatness of God is not the reason you get left behind. It is the very thing that makes it possible for you to keep going when you have nothing left. But the question still stands. What happened to make pardon possible? What closed the gap between the fury of chapter 1 and the comfort of chapter 40? Isaiah answers it in 4 poems scattered through the second half of the book. Scholars call them the servant songs. Isaiah 42, Isaiah 49, Isaiah 42 and 53, and Isaiah 52 and 53. Each one is about a figure Isaiah calls the servant. And reading them in sequence is like watching a portrait come into focus, one detail at a time. In Isaiah 42 verse 1, the servant is introduced. "Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. The servant who brings justice to the entire earth is gentle with broken things. He does not step on the damaged reed. He does not blow out the last little flame barely hanging on." Whoever this person is, power and tenderness are not competing qualities in him. They are both fully present, at the same time in the same hands. In Isaiah 49, the servant speaks directly, and what he says is stunning. Verse 4, "But I said, I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for nothing and emptiness." He is discouraged. He feels as though his work has produced nothing. But then God responds, "It is too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob. I will make you as a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth." The servant's assignment is not smaller than he thought. It is bigger. What looks like failure is not the end. It is the beginning of something that reaches further than he can see. In Isaiah 50, the servant describes what is coming for him. Verse 6, "I gave my back to those who strike, and my cheeks to those who pull out the beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting." He is being beaten. He is being publicly humiliated. And he does not run. And then Isaiah 52 verse 13 through chapter 53. This is why first-century Jews, reading this passage in the weeks after the crucifixion, fell to their knees. Because it does not read like a prediction. It reads like a report filed by an eyewitness. Isaiah chapter 53 is the most detailed description of the crucifixion in the entire Bible. Written 700 years before Jesus walked into Jerusalem, Isaiah 52 to verse 14. His appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. The beatings before the cross left a man who did not look like a man. Isaiah 53, verse 3. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. The crowd that shouted Hosanna on Sunday shouted Crucify him on Friday. Verses 4 and 5. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. Pierced. That is a specific word. Not beaten, not executed. Pierced. The nails through the hands, the spear through the side. John chapter 19 records both. Isaiah wrote them 700 years earlier. Verse 7. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Pilate marveled that Jesus answered nothing when accused. He stood silent, just as Isaiah said. Verse 9. And they made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. A rich man's tomb. Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the Sanhedrin, gave his own prepared tomb for the burial. John chapter 19 records the name. Isaiah recorded the detail 7 centuries earlier. Verse 10. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. He shall prolong his days. A man described as crushed to death will prolong his days. There is only one way that sentence makes sense. Verse 11. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Make many to be accounted righteous. That is the word Paul will spend an entire letter to the Romans unpacking 700 years after Isaiah wrote it. Justification. Declared right before God, not because of what you did, but because of what the servant carried on your behalf. And it is already there, already sitting on the page, already waiting. This is why early Christians called Isaiah the 5th gospel. Philip, in Acts chapter 8, encounters an Ethiopian official traveling home from Jerusalem, sitting in his chariot reading Isaiah 53. Philip climbs in beside him and asks, "Do you understand what you are reading?" And the man says, "How can I unless someone guides me?" Philip starts from that chapter and explains the gospel of Jesus. Isaiah 53 was sufficient on its own as the foundation for understanding who Jesus was and what he came to do. But Isaiah is not finished. After the servant is crushed, after the guilt offering is complete, the book opens out. It becomes wide and bright and staggeringly generous. Isaiah chapter 55, verse 1. Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And he who has no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Read that slowly. Come if you are thirsty. Come if you have no money. Buy without paying. How? Because someone else already paid. The servant of chapter 53 was crushed and the account was settled. And now the invitation goes out to everyone. Not the qualified. Not the religiously credentialed. Everyone. Verse 6. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Verses 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. This passage is often read as God saying he is mysterious and beyond understanding. But in context, something more specific is happening. God is saying, you think I would turn someone away because of what they have done. I think differently than you do. My mercy is higher than your categories. My grace is larger than your framework. The gap between your thoughts and mine is not the bad news. The gap between your thoughts and mine is the good news. And then verse 11. So shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. What was sent? The servant. And the promise is that the mission will not fail. Whatever it was sent to do, it will do. Now I want to stop and show you something that changed everything when it happened in 1947. A young Bedouin shepherd in the Judean desert, near the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, was searching for a lost goat. He threw a stone into a cave and heard something shatter inside. He climbed in and found a collection of clay jars. Inside one of them was a scroll wrapped in linen. It turned out to be the most significant manuscript discovery of the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And among them was the most important single scroll ever found, a complete, virtually intact copy of the book of Isaiah. Here's why it matters. Before 1947, the oldest complete manuscript of Isaiah that scholars possessed dated to around 1000 AD. The Great Isaiah Scroll from the Dead Sea dates to approximately 125 BC. That is over 1,000 years older than what we have been working from. And when they placed the two manuscripts side by side, they found that the text was essentially identical, minor scribal variations. No substantial differences in meaning. The book had been transmitted with extraordinary faithfulness across more than a millennium of hand copying, and the scroll copied in 125 BC contains Isaiah 53, fully intact, exactly as we have it today. That means 125 years before Jesus was born. The description of a servant pierced for our transgressions, led like a lamb to slaughter given a rich man's tomb, prolonging his days after death, was already sitting in a library in the Judean desert unchanged. The scroll predates the events it describes. The argument that someone revised Isaiah after the fact to match Jesus does not survive contact with that jar of clay and that scroll of linen. The words were written before. The events happened after. The book that held them together did not change. If this is opening up the Bible in a way you have not seen it before, the most important thing you can do right now is subscribe, leave a comment, and share this with someone who needs it. That is genuinely how people find this content. It grows because you pass it on. Thank you for being here. So what does all of this mean for you right now? What does a 66-chapter scroll written 2,700 years ago say to the life you are actually living? Let me give you 3 things. The first is this. The holiness of God is not the obstacle. It is the answer. When Isaiah saw the seraphim declaring, "Holy, holy, holy," and fell to the ground saying, "Woe is me," he was not wrong about his condition. He was genuinely unclean. He was in the presence of something infinitely pure, and he had no basis for being there. But the holiness that exposed him was the same holiness that cleaned him. The burning coal from the altar did not destroy him. It removed what was wrong. The very attribute of God that should have been the barrier became the instrument of restoration. We tend to think of God's holiness as the reason for the distance. Isaiah shows us it is the reason for the intervention. A God who was holy in the way a beautiful painting is holy, meaning untouchable, behind glass, something you admire from a distance, that God would have nothing to say to Isaiah on the floor. But a God whose holiness is active, who cannot look at what is broken and call it acceptable, who cannot leave what is wrong unaddressed, that God sends a coal, that God sends a servant, that God closes the gap himself, because the holiness that refuses to accept the broken version of you is the same holiness that does something about it. The servant of Isaiah 53 is the coal from the altar carried to you, not to accuse, to cleanse. The second thing, God does not wait for favorable conditions before he shows up. Uzziah just died. The political world was shaking. The Assyrian Empire was expanding toward Jerusalem. The northern kingdom would fall within 20 years. Isaiah is writing in the middle of geopolitical collapse, and he is recording visions of a virgin giving birth to God with us, a child born who is called Everlasting Father, a servant who will bear the iniquity of them all. The promises are not issued when things are stable. They are issued in the middle of the instability. Every time you expect God to work when the conditions are right, Isaiah will show you a chapter where he did it in the middle of ruin, or announced it just before the ruin arrived, or described the far side of the ruin in detail while standing in the worst of it. The chapters of judgment in Isaiah 1 through 39 are not God abandoning his people. They are God refusing to let things stay broken. Judgment and mercy in Isaiah are not opposites. They are the same movement. God will not look at what is wrong and call it fine. He names it, he exposes it. And then, in the same breath, he reaches in. A God who would overlook what is broken in order to keep the peace would not be a God worth trusting with anything. The third thing, the invitation in Isaiah 55 is still open. Come, everyone who thirsts. That word, everyone, has not been revised since Isaiah wrote it. It has not been narrowed or updated or qualified out of recognition. The person reading this right now who has the most reason to believe they are outside the reach of that invitation. The one carrying something they cannot name out loud, the one who has been away too long, who has done too much, who has tried too many times and failed every single one. Isaiah 55 was written for that person specifically. Buy without money. Receive without earning. The price was paid in Isaiah 53. The invitation was opened in Isaiah 55. The only remaining thing is to come. The book of Isaiah ends with a vision. Chapters 65 and 66. And it is a vision of something entirely new. Isaiah 65, verses 17 through 19. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem to be a joy, and her people to be a gladness. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. No more shall be heard in it the sound of weeping and the cry of distress. No more weeping. Isaiah, who wept with a nation watching its foundation shake, who watched Assyria reduce city after city to silence, who declared judgment in chapter after chapter, and tried to comfort the grieving with promises that must have seemed impossibly distant, ends here, with a city full of joy, a God who rejoices, and nothing more to cry about. The book of Revelation draws directly from these final chapters. The new heaven and the new earth, the new Jerusalem, the end of mourning. John, writing at the end of the 1st century, sees the same vision at the end of the New Testament that Isaiah saw at the end of his scroll. 2 books, 7 centuries apart. 2 men who never met, ending in the same place, because they are describing the same destination. Isaiah's 66 chapters are the key to the entire Bible, because Isaiah does exactly what the whole Bible does. It begins with the problem, which is that human beings are unclean and God is holy and the distance between them seems uncrossable. It follows the cost of crossing that distance, which is a servant crushed for our iniquities, pierced for our transgressions, who opened not his mouth. And it ends with the world as God intended it. Not the world we ruined, a new one, built on what the servant accomplished. 39 chapters of judgment and law. 27 chapters of comfort and new creation. A hinge in the middle where a voice in the wilderness prepares the way. And at the center of it all, a lamb led to slaughter who said nothing because there was nothing to say. He had already decided. It was already written. Before Bethlehem. Before Golgotha. Before the garden on Sunday morning. Isaiah had written it all down. And then, 700 years later, in the wilderness near the Jordan River, a man named John stood in the water and looked up and said, Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Isaiah had already written it. It was already in the scroll. In 1947, a shepherd threw a stone into a cave, and the jar cracked, and the scroll was still there, still intact, still saying exactly what it said when it was written 2,100 years before that stone was thrown. The ink did not fade. The words did not change. And the one they were written about arrived exactly when and how and why Isaiah said he would. 2,700 years later, the scroll is still open. The invitation is still standing. Come, everyone who thirsts. If this opens something up for you in the Bible, the most important thing you can do is subscribe. Leave a comment below and share this with one person who needs to see it. That is genuinely how we reach more people with this. We depend on you to pass it on. Thank you for being here. God bless you.